Welcome, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, and for more bedtime stories, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I'd love to know that too. I never thought moving into that old double house on the corner of Lincoln Avenue would change the way I looked at people forever. At the time, it felt like the right decision. Rent was cheap, and after splitting with my job in Ohio, I needed somewhere new to start fresh. My boyfriend David and our 2-year-old daughter Lila came with me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The double was nothing fancy. 2 units, thin walls, peeling paint. But we made it feel like home. I hung Lila's drawings on the fridge, stacked my thrifted mugs on the shelves, and tried not to mind that our neighbors kept to themselves. On one side, an older couple. On the other, a middle-aged man named Carl and his girlfriend Patty. I never spoke more than a hello to them. The first few months passed quietly enough. I worked part-time at a laundromat down the street. David did handyman jobs here and there, and most of our days revolved around Lila. We didn't have much, but we were happy. That's probably why I ignored the uneasy feeling I sometimes got when I caught Carl staring too long from his porch, or when Patty would abruptly stop talking as soon as I walked outside. It started the way these things always do, with something so small you almost convince yourself you imagined it. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where the breeze feels soft and the sidewalks hum with kids' laughter. We decided to walk to the corner store just 10 minutes away to grab some snacks. Lila was bouncing in her stroller, clapping her hands at every passing dog. We weren't gone more than 20 minutes. When we came back, I froze at the front steps. The lock looked wrong. The paint around the knob was scraped, deep dents in the wood, and right in the middle of the door was a smeared blue-gray streak. David leaned closer. "That's fresh," he muttered, pressing his thumb to it. "Somebody tried to get in." My chest tightened. In broad daylight? I glanced at the back door, the same blue marks, and right above the knob, the faint shape of a boot print. "Who would—" I started, but David cut me off, ushering me and Lila inside quickly. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the thought. Whoever did it knew we'd only been gone a short time, which meant they were watching. Over the next week, the uneasiness grew into something sharper. I found the bathroom window latch broken. My bottle of dish soap, usually balanced neatly by the sink, was cracked open like someone had dropped it hard. Random items. My curling iron, Lila's toy blocks, had this strange oily residue on them, slick and chemical smelling. One night while folding laundry, I whispered, "David, does it feel like stuff keeps moving?" He sighed, rubbed his forehead. "Yeah." I thought maybe I was just losing track. We weren't. The moment that cemented my worst fear came a few nights later. I went out to toss the trash in the alley dumpster. When I lifted the lid, I froze. Inside was a short metal rod, one end wrapped in a washcloth, a torn blue glove tied over it. My stomach dropped. That was it, the same tool that had left those blue marks on our door. Something in me told me to check the neighbor's dumpster too. Against my better judgment, I peeked. I almost collapsed. Inside their black trash bag were my things. My old car title, which I kept hidden in a duffel bag in my closet. A few of my clothes, some makeup, even little kitchen items. My chest pounded as the back door creaked open. Patty stepped out, saw me by their trash, then turned to yell inside. A second later, Carl appeared in the doorway, shirtless, his heavy frame filling the frame, his pale skin slick with sweat. He stared at me like I had crossed a line. I forced the words out. "I know you've been in my house." Carl smirked. "I didn't steal anything." His tone was mocking, dismissive. "I swear to God, Carl, if you step foot in my house again—" My voice broke. I didn't even recognize the words coming out of my mouth. "I'll burn your house down." His grin widened. He didn't look scared. He looked amused. I called the police. 2 officers came, listened to me, then ambled over to Carl's porch. They spoke to him and Patty for less than 5 minutes before returning. "Nothing we can really do," one officer said, handing back my ID. "No proof they stole anything." I wanted to scream. "Proof? Their trash bag is full of my stuff." He shrugged. "Could be a mistake. Keep your doors locked." And then they left. Within minutes, Carl was outside, phone pressed to his ear, grinning at me like he'd already won. It happened so fast. Headlights swept the alley. Cars pulled up. 5, maybe 6 of them. A lifted truck rolled in last, blocking our own car in the driveway. David stepped to the window, his face drained. They brought people. I peeked over his shoulder. Men spilling out, voices loud, heavy boots hitting the pavement. One man wore a tank top, gold chains glinting under the streetlight. In his hand, a gun. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shoved a chair against the back door just as someone rattled it hard. "David!" I screamed, scooping Lila up. She laughed, thinking it was a game. The back door thudded again. Voices shouted outside, getting closer. I didn't think. I bolted for the front, David right behind me. As we reached the porch, a deafening pop cracked the night. A gunshot. I shrieked, clutching Lila to my chest. "Please, no!" Feet pounded around the side of the house, shapes in the shadows. But somehow, we made it down the street, around the corner, lungs burning. I don't know how we weren't hit. The police came again, lights flashing. They combed the street but claimed they found no evidence of gunfire. They wrote a report, took down our statements, but their voices were flat, detached. I begged them to wait while I grabbed clothes. They agreed, standing outside. Inside, I ran to Lila's room. The smell hit me first, sharp, chemical, sour. On the carpet, on her tiny clothes, on her diapers, weed killer. A whole gallon emptied. I staggered back, gagging. They had been inside again. While we ran for our lives, they broke in and poisoned my child's belongings. I grabbed what little was untouched and fled. That was the last night I slept in that house. We moved across town within days. Nothing ever came of it. No arrests, no charges, not even a follow-up call. Some nights I wake up in a sweat, heart pounding, sure that Carl's smirk is waiting in the dark. I dream of blue marks on doors, of oily residue on toys, of running with Lila in my arms while shadows close in. The scariest part isn't what happened, it's what never got answered. Why us? How many times were they inside watching us sleep? And why, even after police stood in front of our door, did no one care enough to stop it? Those questions keep me awake more than the memory of the gunshot. Because in the end, it wasn't just our neighbors who failed us. It was everyone. And I'll never get closure. I was 11 years old when my parents and I moved into a small duplex on the east side of Brookfield, a working-class town that had taken a heavy hit after the housing crisis. At the time, I didn't understand why we had to leave the house I grew up in, or why my dad had started drinking more than usual. To me, all I knew was that we were moving somewhere smaller, and smaller meant cramped bedrooms, thinner walls, and a backyard that didn't really feel like ours. The duplex wasn't much. Beige siding with peeling paint, cracked pavement on the driveway, and a sagging wooden fence that leaned like it was ready to collapse. My parents tried to make the best of it, though. Mom said it would just be for a few years until we get back on our feet. Dad barely said anything at all. He worked long shifts at the steel plant and came home with grease-stained clothes and eyes that always looked older than the day before. Our neighbors seemed decent enough. The weekend after we moved in, a few of them came over for a little housewarming get-together. I remember the scent of potato salad, cheap beer, and my mom's nervous laugh as she tried to be friendly. People brought casseroles, folding chairs, and stories about the neighborhood. That night, after too many voices had filled our living room, my mom told me I was staying up past bedtime and sent me to my room. My bedroom shared a wall with the living room, so even though I tried to sleep, I couldn't help but overhear the adults' conversation. Most of it was boring. Work gossip, complaints about property taxes. But then I caught something that made me sit up. They were talking about the man who lived in the unit next to ours. His name, I learned, was Mr. Raymond Keller. He used to be a nice guy, one woman said. But after the divorce, he changed. Keeps to himself now. Changed? My mom asked, her polite tone barely masking her curiosity. He was quiet before, but now it's different, the neighbor continued. He's got that yard fenced off, hedges tall enough to block out the sun. Nobody sees him. Just gardening all the time. Day and night. But that's all he does. Gardening. Someone else muttered, I've seen him come out of that greenhouse, and he looks filthy. Like he's been digging through more than just soil. They laughed nervously, but there was an edge to it. At 11 years old, I didn't know much about divorce or depression or the weird ways adults processed pain. But something about the way they spoke, half joking, half afraid, sent chills down my spine. That was the last night I got a peaceful sleep in that house. A week later, curiosity got the best of me. The stairwell in our duplex had a narrow window that looked out onto the backyard. From there I could see past our cracked patio into Mr. Keller's section. He had erected a tall wooden fence topped with overgrown hedges, like he was determined to keep out the world. Beyond it, his yard looked wild, almost feral. Rows of bushes, tangled vines, and bright flowers thrived in unnatural abundance. In the far corner sat a greenhouse, glass panels fogged with condensation, the inside consumed by green shadows. One afternoon, while I lingered by the stairwell window, I finally saw him. Mr. Keller limped out of the greenhouse, his clothes stained dark with soil, or what I thought was soil. He looked around nervously, twitching like someone being watched, then disappeared back into his house. Something in my stomach turned. I wanted to tell myself he was just a lonely old man who found comfort in plants. But the way he moved, the way he scanned the yard as if hiding a secret, it gnawed at me. That night, under a full moon, I did something stupid. When my parents had gone to bed, I slipped out the back door, crossed the patchy grass, and climbed over the fence. The hedge scraped my arms as I squeezed through, leaving small welts. The air smelled heavy with damp soil and something sour, metallic. I crouched low, hidden between the hedge and fence, when suddenly the back door of Mr. Keller's house burst open. He stepped outside, clean now, shockingly so. His hair was combed and he wore a dark suit with a tie knotted neatly. His limp seemed less pronounced as he walked toward the greenhouse with unsettling confidence. Standing before the door, he whispered, I miss you, Evelyn. But you left me, didn't you? You left, and now it's my duty to keep us alive. To keep what we planted alive. He straightened his tie, his breathing shallow, and then unlocked the greenhouse. What happened next has replayed in my nightmares for over 10 years. Inside, I could hear him speaking, cooing almost like a child. His voice shifted between sobs, whispers, and bursts of high-pitched giggling. Beneath it all, another sound cut through, metal scraping, chains rattling, and a faint buzzing like a saw. Then came a scream. Not his. It was muffled but sharp, the kind of scream that comes from deep in the chest when someone is in unbearable pain. I froze, every instinct in me begging to run, but curiosity and terror rooted me to the spot. Minutes later, he stumbled out of the greenhouse. The suit was ruined, splattered with something dark that gleamed in the moonlight. He muttered to himself, his face twisted in something between joy and grief. Then he hurried back inside his house, slamming the door shut. My chest heaved. Every rational part of me screamed to leave, but something stronger, some horrific pull, forced me to creep forward. The greenhouse loomed ahead, a humid shadow in the moonlight. My trembling hand reached for the latch. The door creaked as I pulled it open. The smell hit me first, coppery, raw, nauseating. Then my eyes adjusted. Hanging from the rafters, arms and legs bound in chains, was a woman. Her body was cut open, her back split like butchered meat. Her ribs were bent outward grotesquely, splayed like wings. And worse, her lungs still moved, They rose and fell, ragged breaths dragging through what should have been silence. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Her eyes rolled toward me, glassy with pain, silently begging. I bolted. I don't remember climbing the fence, don't remember how I made it back inside. My legs carried me on instinct. My chest burned as I shook my parents awake, sobbing, trying to explain between broken words what I had seen. At first they thought it was a nightmare, but when I wouldn't stop crying, when I couldn't stop shaking, they called the police. By the time the cops came, the greenhouse was empty. No chains, no woman, no blood, just plants. Rows and rows of plants, thick and green, leaves wet with condensation. Mr. Keller told them it was all a misunderstanding. He was a gardener, nothing more. They believed him. We moved out less than a year later. My parents said it was because the duplex was too small. But I knew the truth. Even now, more than a decade later, I see her every time I close my eyes. The woman in the greenhouse. Lungs rising and falling long after they shouldn't have. And sometimes when I drive through Brookfield on rare occasions, I swear I can still smell that coppery sweetness in the air, drifting from behind the tall hedges of a garden that never should have grown so green. I was 27 when I took a job that, on paper, sounded like the best opportunity I could have asked for. It was 2016, and I had just left a string of night shift jobs that were burning me out. Bartending, warehouse stocking, and even a brief stint at a call center. None of it felt sustainable. When I was offered a live-in position as a home health aide, I jumped at the chance. My patient's name was Cale Rivenhart, a 21-year-old man whose struggles were layered and complicated. Kyle had been diagnosed with Asperger's, sensory processing disorder, and borderline personality disorder. On top of that, he'd dabbled heavily in drugs. Whatever his so-called friends put in front of him, he'd take. His mother, Marissa Rivenhart, had finally stepped in after a series of incidents, including Cale being legally declared incompetent after draining thousands from his own bank account under the influence of people who used him. Kyle lived in a gated condo complex on the edge of Silver Pine Ridge, a suburban neighborhood built around a manicured golf course. It was the kind of place where silence felt expensive, where even the sidewalks looked polished. Most of the residents were older couples who spent their days golfing or socializing at the community center. Kyle and I were the youngest by far, which made us stand out even when we didn't want to. Marissa explained my duties clearly when I moved in. Keep the condo clean, keep food in the fridge, make sure Cale takes his medication, and most importantly, let me know if anyone suspicious comes around. You're not a guard dog, but I need to know what's happening. At first, I thought she was exaggerating. Kyle didn't seem dangerous, just lonely. But Marissa leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. There's one person in particular you need to watch out for. Her name is Soraya Crail. She stays off and on with her father, who lives in the unit below you. Soraya is 38, but she looks much younger, tall, blonde, rail-thin. She's an addict. No car, no steady work. She's trouble. She has a way of manipulating Kyle, and she's not allowed in this condo under any circumstances. I remember nodding, thinking it sounded simple enough, but nothing about what followed would be simple. Living with Cale was a strange adjustment. He could be sweet, almost childlike at times, laughing at cartoons or obsessively rearranging his vinyl collection. But he was unpredictable. Some days he'd stay in bed for 12 hours, refusing to eat. Other days he'd pace the condo, muttering angrily about people who weren't there. Despite his quirks, I liked him. He wasn't malicious. He was more like a kid stuck in a man's body, desperate for friends, desperate to be accepted. That desperation, I realized quickly, was his greatest weakness. The first time I heard about Soraya was during a walk to the clubhouse gym. Cale spotted her in the parking lot before I did. She was standing by her father's SUV smoking a cigarette, her hair messy, her frame so thin it looked fragile. When she noticed Cale, her eyes lit up in a way that set my nerves on edge. "Kyle," she called, her voice airy, sing-song. "Come here, I need to talk to you." I put a hand on his arm before he could move. "We're going to the gym," I said firmly. She smiled at me, but it wasn't friendly. "He's 21. He can make his own choices, can't he?" Kyle shifted uncomfortably, looking down. I answered for him. "Not tonight. Have a good evening." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't push it further. She turned back to her cigarette, muttering something I couldn't hear. Kale didn't say anything the rest of the walk, but I could feel his discomfort. That was the beginning of it. Weeks passed quietly, until the night that changed everything. Kale had gone out of state with his father for a week-long trip. For me, that meant a rare mini vacation in the condo by myself. My best friend Nolan came over to stay, and we spent the night drinking cheap beer and watching old episodes of RuPaul's Drag Race. It was close to 11 p.m. when we heard a knock at the door. Light, almost hesitant. I froze. No one should be here. Nolan muted the TV. Maybe a neighbor? I crept to the peephole and felt my stomach sink. Soraya. She was standing there in the dim hallway light, her face pale, her eyes too wide. I whispered, "It's her." "Don't answer," Nolan said immediately. I didn't. After a few seconds, she knocked again, louder. When I still didn't answer, she lingered, then drifted away. We sat back down, tension thick in the room. 5 minutes later, another knock, this time loud, heavy, the kind of pounding cops use when serving a warrant. My heart jumped. "She's back," I hissed. I looked through the peephole again. Soraya's face was different now. Angry. Her pupils were blown wide, her hair wild, sweat glistening on her forehead. She looked like something unhinged. I stayed silent, but she began shouting. "Kale! Open up, I need to talk to you right now. He owes me money. I need a ride. Kale." Finally, I snapped. "He's not here, Soraya. Go home." Her eyes darted toward the peephole like she could see me. Her voice dropped into a harsh growl. "Then you take me. Right now." "To my boyfriend's, I can't," I said. "I've been drinking. Go home." She let out a piercing scream, punched the door so hard it rattled, and stormed off down the hall. Nolan looked at me, pale. "Dude, she's high as hell. We didn't sleep well that night." The next morning, as Nolan and I were getting ready to go to breakfast, there was another knock. This one was sharp, official. I groaned. "She's back already?" But when I looked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. Not Soraya, a uniformed police officer. I opened the door cautiously. Behind him, the parking lot swarmed with squad cars, a white van marked crime scene unit, and an ambulance. Neighbors stood in clusters whispering. "Morning," the officer said. "We're conducting an investigation. Did either of you hear anything unusual last night?" My chest tightened. "We had an encounter with the neighbor, Soraya Krail. She was here around 11 banging on the door screaming, 'Is she okay?' The officer's expression darkened. "She's in custody. Her father was found dead in his unit this morning. Do you know if Kale owns a crossbow?" I froze. My throat went dry. "Yes, but it's been missing for weeks." The officer exchanged a look with another detective behind him. "We'll need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." Nolan muttered, "Holy shit." The detective's theory came later. Soraya, deep in heroin withdrawal, had tried to manipulate Kale into driving her to her boyfriend's. When that failed, she'd turned to her father, who refused. The argument escalated. She grabbed Kale's stolen crossbow and killed her father in his own living room before taking his truck. She only made it a mile before police tried to pull her over for erratic driving. She fled, leading them on a high-speed chase across 2 counties before crashing. When they finally surrounded her, she told officers she was speeding because she needed to check on her dad. When asked why, she wouldn't answer. By then, the welfare check had already revealed the truth. I couldn't shake the image of her wild, dilated pupils staring through the peephole. her fists slamming into the door. Knowing she'd likely come to us either right before or right after killing her father chilled me to my core. Cale's mother flew in immediately, devastated. She hugged me like I was family, whispering, "If she had gotten inside, I don't even want to think about what might have happened to you." I didn't either. The condo never felt the same after that. Even months later, I'd jump at every unexpected knock, my heart racing, afraid it might somehow be her again. Kyle struggled with the news, oscillating between guilt and confusion, convinced it was somehow his fault. I did my best to comfort him, but the shadow of that night never fully left. That's the thing about evil. It doesn't always come in the form of monsters or strangers. Sometimes it's the neighbor downstairs. Sometimes it's a knock on your door when you least expect it. And sometimes it's the pair of wide, desperate eyes staring back at you through a peephole, right before everything changes forever. I moved to Fairhaven 6 years ago, chasing quiet. That's what I told people whenever they asked why I left the city. I wanted slower mornings, a backyard of my own, a neighborhood where people waved from their porches instead of brushing past without a glance. Pinewood Lane seemed perfect. 6 houses tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac lined with old maples, kids riding bikes in summer, the hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, block barbecues where everyone contributed a dish. For a while, it was everything I'd hoped. I'd grown up in apartments where the neighbors were strangers, walls were thin, and your business leaked whether you wanted it to or not. My father drank, my mother worked double shifts, and noise filled every corner of my life. When I finally saved enough money for a down payment, I promised myself I'd find somewhere peaceful. Fairhaven wasn't fancy, but it was steady. I liked steady, but no place is perfect. Every community has one house people whisper about, one person you keep at arm's length. On Pinewood Lane, that person was Gerald Whitmore. Gerald lived in the largest house at the far end of the circle. The first time I saw his yard, I thought it looked fake. Perfectly even rows of emerald grass so thick it seemed carpeted. Not a single brown patch, not even in August when the rest of ours went dull. At first I was impressed. Then I realized Gerald didn't treat his lawn like pride. He treated it like religion. Every week, landscapers in green trucks rolled up and unloaded gear. And every week, Gerald stood outside barking orders. The first time I saw it up close, I was kneeling in my front garden pulling weeds. Across the way, Gerald was on his porch screaming at 2 men edging the grass. His voice carried like a siren. "You call this a straight line? Are you blind? Do it again." The younger landscaper muttered something. Gerald whipped around so fast I thought he'd swing. He didn't, but the look in his eyes froze me. Cold, flat. He wasn't yelling out of frustration. He was enjoying it. I turned back to my weeds, pretending not to hear. But that was the moment I started paying attention. The real red flag came last summer. Gerald asked a teenage boy down the street, Lucas Miller, 14, to look after his house while he and his wife, Linda, went on vacation. Lucas's parents figured it was a simple job. Water the flowers, bring in the mail, easy money. But the morning Gerald left, Lucas showed up at his parents' kitchen table clutching a letter, eyes wide. I happened to be visiting when he unfolded it. The letter was 5 pages long, typed, numbered instructions. Lucas must visit 3 times a day, no less than 4 hours apart. Living room lights on at precisely 6:45 p.m., off at 10:30 p.m. Kitchen lights on at 8:15 a.m. sharp, off at 8:40 a.m. Do not step on the lawn under any circumstance. Shoes must be removed before walking on the concrete path. Water flowers using provided watering can only. Hose strictly prohibited. Never enter the home. Switches must be operated using stick with loop provided in foyer. Failure to comply will be documented. Surveillance will confirm compliance. At the bottom, bold type. Any deviation will result in immediate termination. Do not test me. Lucas's mom pressed a hand to her mouth. His dad muttered, "What the hell is this? That's insane. I said. Lucas just stared at his sneakers. I don't want to do it anymore. His parents agreed. They called Gerald that afternoon to back out. I was still on their porch when the shouting started over the phone. Gerald's voice was so loud we could hear it through the receiver. You agreed. Your son agreed. This is binding. It's not binding, Gerald, Mr. Miller said evenly. We're not comfortable with this arrangement. You people are unreliable. All of you. Unreliable. Click. The next morning at 6, Gerald was pounding on their door. I watched from my window as Mr. Miller stepped outside, still in pajama pants. Gerald's face was red, spit flying as he shouted, You owe me. He owes me. A deal is a deal. Another neighbor, Dan Rogers, a retired cop, came over. All right, Gerald, calm down. Gerald jabbed a finger at him. I'll let it rest if I get to bare-ass spank the boy. What? Dan barked. You heard me. No, Mr. Miller snapped. Gerald's whole body shook. Then this isn't over. He stormed back to his house, slamming the door so hard it rattled. That was the moment our neighborhood stopped laughing Gerald off as quirky. After that, people noticed Linda less and less. She used to be friendly, a social butterfly, always chatting at block parties, always smiling. But soon she vanished from view. If she appeared at all, it was in quick flashes, watering flowers in the early morning, fetching the mail at dusk. And if Gerald was outside, she wasn't. One winter morning, Carla, from across the street, saw Linda in the driveway with her arm in a sling and a purple bruise under her eye. Carla walked over gently. Linda, honey, what happened? Before Linda could answer, Gerald appeared. She slipped on ice, he said flatly. His hand gripped her shoulder. Carla swore later that Linda's eyes met hers for a second, and that silent look twisted her stomach. That winter, envelopes appeared in every mailbox. Inside was a glossy pamphlet from the landscaping company Gerald used, along with a typed note. It is mandatory that no other home on Pinewood Lane employ these landscapers. Failure to comply will result in legal action. We all laughed at first. There was no HOA, no rules. But the fact he'd gone to the trouble unsettled us. Dan began compiling a folder. Dates, statements, photographs. Mark my words, he said. This is going to end badly. The scariest moment came in spring. Nina and Alex, a young couple new to the block, had just gotten a puppy, a quiet dog kept in their fenced yard. One night, around 2 a.m., their doorbell rang. Alex opened it to find Gerald standing at the edge of the property, just outside the fence. You know, Gerald said, voice low, the first time that dog gets out, you won't have a dog anymore. Alex blinked. What? Gerald reached to his belt and pulled out a pistol. He waved it casually, then pointed toward the backyard. Bang! Nina screamed. Alex slammed the door and called the cops. When they arrived, Gerald claimed he'd been out for a walk, thought they were awake, and stopped by. It's just a misunderstanding. The gun was on my belt, that's all. No harm meant he got a citation. That was it. But something had shifted. None of us slept well that night. Come spring, Gerald took to sitting on his porch with a notebook. Every time someone walked or drove by, he scribbled. What he was writing, nobody knew. I stopped walking past his place entirely. Then the Thompsons put up a swing set in their backyard. One afternoon they came home from work to find tire tracks plowed across the yard, the swing set flattened. Nobody saw it happen. But the tread marks matched the massive tires of Gerald's truck. The folder in Dan's hands grew thicker. By midsummer, the tension was unbearable. Kids weren't allowed to play outside unsupervised. Neighbors stopped hosting cookouts. Everyone whispered the same fear. What about Linda? One Saturday, after a particularly heavy storm, I saw Linda outside alone for the first time in months. Her hair was damp, her sweater clinging, and her arm trembled as she tried to right a toppled flower pot. I walked over, heart pounding. Linda, hey, do you need help? She froze. Her eyes darted toward the house. Linda, I said softly, you don't look okay. We're worried about you. if you need." The front door slammed open. Gerald stormed out, rain plastering his shirt. "She's fine," he barked. His hand gripped her wrist hard enough to make her wince. I stepped back. He dragged her inside. That night, Dan called for a welfare check. Police showed up, knocked, waited. Gerald answered, smiling too wide. "Everything's fine." Linda appeared behind him, eyes hollow, nodding. "I'm fine." They left. By August, Gerald was unraveling in public. He cornered neighbors at the grocery store, spewing venom about his wife's friends, about her sister being too fat to sit on their toilet, about how people should mind their own damn business. Then came the night of the fire. It was past midnight when we smelled smoke. Everyone rushed outside. Gerald's backyard was lit in orange glow. His truck was in flames, fire licking the trees. Sirens wailed down Pinewood. We stood in clusters, watching firefighters battle the blaze. Gerald stood shirtless in his driveway, expression blank, notebook still in his hand. Linda was nowhere to be seen. The fire was ruled accidental, electrical. But none of us believed that. After that night, Gerald vanished. His house sat dark, lawn overgrown, mailbox stuffed with yellowing envelopes. Weeks turned into months. No moving truck ever came, no sign of Linda, no forwarding address. Sometimes, when I drive home late, I see a light flick on in the upstairs window for a second, then off again. But the house is still empty. At least, it's supposed to be. I never thought moving away from my family would feel so liberating, and at the same time so dangerous. When I first left my parents' home in Dublin 2 years ago, all I wanted was a clean break from the constant arguments, the suffocating tension, and the way every small thing, what time I came home, who I was texting, whether I left a light on, turned into a war. University in the UK was my escape. A new country, a new city, and the freedom to just breathe. My first year in student halls was almost everything I imagined. I had my own small room, met people from different backgrounds, stayed up too late watching films, and spent way too much money on takeout. More importantly, I discovered what independence actually meant. Not just paying bills or cooking pasta, but being able to choose who I surrounded myself with. That year, I also met Aaron, the guy who would later become my boyfriend. We weren't serious at first, just a lot of laughing, staying up until sunrise, and being stupid together. But slowly, without me realizing, he became my anchor. By the time second year rolled around, I was ready for a bigger step. Some friends and I decided to rent a student house instead of staying in the halls. It was nothing fancy, just a terraced house on a quiet road near the town center. I picked a ground floor bedroom at the back of the house. The window opened into a tiny yard with a crooked wooden gate that led out to the alley where we kept the bins. "Not bad, eh?" Aaron had said when he first helped me move in, dropping my box of books on the bed. "Not bad at all," I said, though the truth was the gate already bothered me. It was flimsy, with a single latch that looked like it hadn't been changed since the 80s. We tied it shut with some string to keep it from blowing open, but still, I noticed it every time I stepped outside for a smoke. The neighbors on our left were a quiet family who mostly kept to themselves. On the right, though, that was another story. The house looked the same as ours, but the guys living there were older, late 20s, maybe 30s, and they didn't act like students. They threw loud parties in the middle of the week, shouted at each other at 2 in the morning, and once, I swear I heard glass smashing followed by someone yelling in a language I didn't understand. At first, I brushed it off. Students drink, people fight. It wasn't my business. But then something happened that made me realize just how wrong things were next door. It was late September, just a few weeks after we'd moved in, when I was woken by shouting outside. At first, I thought it was drunk people walking home, but when I peeked out of my blinds, I saw flashing blue lights bouncing off the brick walls of our street. I went outside with 2 of my flatmates, curiosity pulling us into the cool night air. On the pavement, one of the men from next door stood covered in blood, his white t-shirt shredded and soaked through. His arm was sliced open in several places, and there was a deep cut across his forehead. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. The police were holding back another man in handcuffs, shoving him into the back of a van. I caught the word knife shouted between officers. The injured man staggered, almost falling. Out of pure instinct, I stepped forward. "Are you okay? Do you want some help?" He turned his head, his eyes glassy but intense. Yeah, love, just... Can I come inside? Clean up?" Something about him unsettled me. His grin looked forced, and his hands, sticky with blood, kept twitching. But I couldn't just leave him bleeding on the street. Against my better judgment, I brought him into our hallway. "Bathroom's that way," I said quickly, pointing. He smirked, looking me up and down. "You're kind. Most people wouldn't." One of my flatmates fetched an old t-shirt for him, and he muttered thanks while dabbing at his wounds. But the whole time, his eyes wouldn't stop drifting to me. He leaned closer at one point, whispering, "You've got pretty hair. Bet your boyfriend doesn't appreciate it enough." I froze. "Okay, I think you should head home now," I said firmly. He chuckled, muttering something under his breath before stumbling back outside. That was the last time I willingly spoke to him. For a while, I managed to avoid him. I'd see him smoking on the curb sometimes when I walked to class, but I kept my head down. Until one day, he approached me outside the corner shop. "Hey, love," he called, walking straight toward me. I pretended not to hear, but he blocked my path. His breath stank of weed. "Why you ignoring me?" "Thought we had a connection. I've gotta go," I muttered, trying to sidestep him. He grinned, his teeth yellow. "No worries. I'll just wait at yours, yeah? We can talk there." I froze. "Don't." But he was already walking toward my street. My chest tightened. I called Aaron in a panic, but he wasn't home. When I turned the corner, sure enough, there he was, with one of his flatmates, sitting on my doorstep like he owned the place. I couldn't face them. I lingered near the shop for almost an hour, heart hammering, before they finally wandered off. Only then did I sprint home, lock the door, and collapse on my bed shaking. After that, things escalated in ways I never imagined. One evening, I went for a smoke in the yard and noticed the gate was wide open. The string we'd tied was slashed clean through. My stomach dropped. None of my flatmates had been outside that day. "Aaron, I don't like this," I told him over the phone. "Then don't use the yard," he said. "I'll help you fix the latch properly when I'm over." But even after we replaced the string, it happened again. Open gate, string cut, always at night. The shouting from next door grew worse too. Sometimes it sounded like furniture being thrown against the walls. Sometimes it was just endless screaming. We called the council once, but nothing came of it. Then came the night that still keeps me awake. Aaron was staying over, asleep beside me. He's the heaviest sleeper I know. But suddenly, around 3 a.m., he shook me awake. "Shh," he whispered. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath. At first, nothing. Then, whispers. Faint, low voices coming from the yard. My blood turned to ice. We both sat up slowly. Then came the sound of the gate slamming open, wood banging against the brick wall. Footsteps crunched on the gravel right beneath my window. I had left it cracked open because of the heat. The voices grew louder. One of them rattled the handle of the back door, soft at first, then harder. "Don't move," Aaron breathed. I gripped his arm. My curtains were drawn, thank God, but I could hear them right outside, close enough to touch the glass. Then, unmistakably, the sound of my window being pushed wider. I swallowed a scream. One of the men muttered something in a language I didn't understand. The frame creaked as they tried to force it open. That was it. Aaron grabbed my hand and whispered, "Go." Now we bolted. No shoes, no coats. Just grabbed my phone and ran out of the room, out the front door and down the street. I called my flatmates, telling them to lock their doors, then dialed the police with shaking fingers. The patrol car arrived in under 5 minutes. By then, the men had scattered. The officers caught one in the alley, armed with a kitchen knife. The other was found a few streets away, high and laughing like nothing had happened. When the police raided their house, they found meth, heroin, and more knives. One of them was sentenced to 2 years in prison for intent to cause harm. But none of that erased the image in my head. My window sliding open, the whispering voices, the knife in the dark. Even now, back home in Dublin, I wake at the slightest noise. Sometimes I dream of footsteps in the yard and wake up gasping. Aaron tries to comfort me, saying, "It's over. They're gone." But I can't stop thinking, what if he hadn't woken me that night? What if they had made it inside? I don't think I'll ever fully know the answer. I was 11 years old, almost 12, when everything changed in the small apartment I shared with my mom. Looking back, I can trace the start of that night to the way our lives were set up, the way the building itself almost funneled me into the center of something I never asked to be part of. We lived in a converted house on the edge of Eastford, a tired little Massachusetts town where every building looked like it was older than it had any right to be. Our home wasn't really an apartment complex, more like a crumbling old Victorian that had been chopped into 3 units. The smallest was in the basement, half sunk into the ground, occupied by an older man who barely came out. My mom and I had the first floor, a long, narrow 2-bedroom with creaky floors and doors that stuck in the winter. Above us lived a woman named Carla. Carla was in her early 30s, and to me, just a kid, she seemed glamorous. She had this sharp laugh you could hear through the floors, wore bright lipstick, and always had people coming and going at odd hours. My mom told me early on, "Don't get too close with Carla. She's got her own mess to deal with later." I'd learn what she meant. Carla was dealing drugs, mostly coke, sometimes pills. At the time, though, I just knew that her apartment always smelled like cigarettes, perfume, and something sharp that stung my nose when the heat came on. My mom worked as a server at a diner just a few blocks away, about a 5-minute walk if you cut through the back alley. She'd pick up extra shifts whenever she could, which meant that a lot of nights I was left on my own. Not that she didn't care. She always made sure I had dinner, homework done, phone numbers on the fridge. But money was tight, and working was the only way she could keep us afloat. I didn't mind most of the time. I was at that age where being alone felt almost grown up. I'd make boxed mac and cheese, watch reruns on our tiny TV, and wait for her to come home. But the night of my 12th birthday, that's when everything spiraled into something I still think about 2 decades later. It was March 2004. The air outside was damp and smelled faintly of thawing earth and cigarette smoke drifting from neighbors' porches. My birthday had been quiet, just cake with my mom after school, a few presents. She had to work the evening shift at the diner, so I promised I'd be fine on my own. I remember lying on the couch in my socks, flipping through channels when the knock came. It wasn't the heavy slam of the building's front door. It was our door, 3 quick knocks, sharp, almost impatient. I opened it without thinking. That was mistake number 1. Standing there was Ray, Carla's boyfriend. He was in his late 20s, wiry, with a patchy beard and jittery eyes that never seemed to settle. My mom had let him use our phone before, back when not everyone had a cell, and I recognized him right away. "Hey kiddo," Ray said, too casual. He smelled faintly of sweat and something chemical. "Your mom home?" I shook my head. "She's at work." He nodded like he already knew. Then, "Can I use your phone real quick? Just need to make a call. She's cool with it, right?" He wasn't wrong. Mom had let him and Carla use the phone a few times, so, without much thought, I stepped aside and let him in. The receiver sat in the living room on the side table. Ray picked it up, dialed a number, listened. Then he hung up. A pause. He dialed again, listened, hung up. He repeated this 2, maybe 3 times. I sat on the couch, stomach tightening. Something about the way he kept hanging up made me uneasy. And then came the sound. The front door of the building downstairs, heavy wood metal latch, slammed open. It echoed up through the thin walls like thunder. I froze. Ray froze too, his eyes darting toward the sound. He turned toward me, finger pressed against his lips. Shh. His voice was sharp now, urgent. Don't say a word. Before I could even react, he moved fast, padding down the hall toward the bedrooms. My room. I watched him disappear inside, the door clicking shut just as there was a heavy knock at our apartment door. Not just a knock, a cop's knock. My mouth went dry. Slowly I opened the door. 2 police officers stood there. One, tall with dark hair, asked, "Is Ray in here?" I hesitated. My chest tightened. Yeah, he just went into my room." The officer's face didn't change, just gave a short nod. "Can we come in?" I stepped back. As he entered, he looked down at me and added, "Can you do me a favor? Let my partner in through the back door. It'll be easier that way." My legs felt like lead as I walked him through the narrow kitchen, past the table shoved against the wall. I opened the back door, which led to a small enclosed fire escape. His partner slipped in, giving me a reassuring nod before heading straight to my bedroom. From the kitchen, I watched as they pulled Ray out of my closet. His face was pale, eyes wild, like a trapped animal. He didn't fight, didn't say a word. They cuffed him quickly, the metallic click-click echoing in my ears. "Go wait in the living room," one officer told me gently. I obeyed, hands shaking, trying not to cry. Through the thin walls I could hear muffled voices, the scrape of boots, the sound of the back door opening again. Then silence. When I finally peeked out the front window, I saw the police car pull away, Ray in the back seat. I locked every door, grabbed my keys, and ran. My chest burned as I sprinted the 2 blocks to the diner, tears blurring the streetlights. By the time I pushed open the glass door, breathless and crying, my mom was already hurrying out from behind the counter. She pulled me into her arms, holding me tight. "What happened?" she demanded. Through sobs, I told her everything. Her face darkened as she listened, anger flashing in her eyes. "That son of a bitch. Using you like that." She cupped my face in her hands. "Listen to me. You do not ever let anyone in when I'm not home. I don't care who it is. You hear me?" I nodded, still shaking. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of Ray's face in my closet wouldn't leave me. The way he had looked at me, finger to his lips. The way the cops had pulled him out like he'd known they would come. I never found out what he was wanted for. Mom never told me, maybe because she didn't know herself. Or maybe because she didn't want me to carry the weight of it. Carla moved out a few months later, disappearing as suddenly as she had arrived. The upstairs apartment stayed empty for a long time after that. Even now, more than 20 years later, I sometimes wake up at night convinced I can hear that heavy knock on the door, and I think about how easily things could have gone differently if the police hadn't shown up when they did. I never thought my second year of college would leave me more afraid of going home than walking across campus late at night. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs were there from the beginning. I just didn't want to acknowledge them. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. The school's student housing office gave me a short list of places still available, but most were either way out of my budget or already full. Out of desperation, I ended up in a cooperative housing community on the outskirts of town. It was 3 old Victorian-style houses grouped together on a block about 15 minutes from campus by bike. It wasn't ideal. The houses were drafty, the plumbing was questionable, and there were too many people crammed together for comfort. But it was cheap, and when you're a broke college student, that's usually all that matters. Most of the residents were students like me. Sophomores, juniors, a handful of seniors. But there were exceptions. A couple of grad students lived there, some teaching assistants, and even 2 guys in their late 20s finishing degrees they had paused years earlier. But the one who stood out most to me from the first week was an older woman named Miriam Hale. From what I could tell, Miriam was in her late 50s, though she looked older. She had shoulder-length gray hair that was always a little unkempt and walked with a stiff limp, as if her back or hip had never healed from some old injury. She rarely spoke to anyone, and when she did, it was with this strangely flat tone, as though she was repeating words she didn't really mean. Most of the time, she just had this blank, unblinking stare that made my skin crawl, even when I told myself not to be judgmental. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university. Maybe a faculty member taking advantage of cheap housing, or maybe an alum who had been allowed to stay. But nobody seemed to know. And when I asked about her early on, the most common answer I got was a shrug. The first time I saw her do something that unsettled me was in the common kitchen of our house. The other two houses each had their own kitchens, so I wasn't sure why she was there at all. A bunch of us were cooking one night, music playing from someone's speaker, everyone chatting and laughing. And there was Miriam, just standing silently in the corner, not eating, not cooking, not saying a word. At first, I thought maybe she was waiting for something, but after a while it became clear she wasn't doing anything at all, just standing, watching. I caught her eyes once across the room, and I couldn't tell if she was looking at me or past me. But when I turned away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was focused on me specifically. What made it worse was that nobody else acknowledged her. Not a glance, not a hello, nothing. It was like she wasn't even there, even though she was only a few feet away. That night, when I mentioned it to one of my housemates, a guy named Eli, he just shrugged. She does that sometimes. Best to ignore her. Everyone else does. That doesn't bother anyone else? I asked. Eli gave a little laugh. You're new here. You'll get used to it. I didn't think I would. A week later, I was working at my desk when I glanced out my window and froze. Miriam was standing in the middle of the street outside. It was almost midnight, the street lamps buzzing faintly, and there she was. Motionless, her head tilted up at my window. She wasn't on the sidewalk. She wasn't walking by. She was just standing in the middle of the road, staring up at me. It was late October. The temperature had dropped, and she wore only a thin cardigan. I couldn't imagine she wasn't freezing, but she didn't move. My first instinct was to duck out of sight, but for some reason, I don't know if it was nervous politeness or just my dumb habit of trying to be nice. I raised my hand and gave a quick wave. The moment I did, I regretted it. Instead of waving back, Miriam's face twisted into this strange, almost childlike grin. She jumped up and down twice like she was excited, then turned and ran clumsily toward the house next door. I sat frozen at my desk, my stomach in knots. By waving, I had confirmed something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. She had been watching me, and now she knew exactly which window was mine. The next morning over breakfast, I asked another housemate, Nora, about her. Do you know much about Miriam? I tried to sound casual, though my voice cracked. Nora raised an eyebrow. Why? I don't know. She's just kind of strange, that's all. I saw her outside last night. She's always been here, Nora said, almost dismissively. Everyone just leaves her alone. Don't make it a big deal. That doesn't answer my question, I pressed. Nora sighed. Look, she's connected to the housing somehow. I think she's like an alum or something. Maybe she helps out. I don't know. People say she's harmless. I wanted to believe that. But harmless people didn't stand in the street at midnight staring into students' bedrooms. Things escalated quickly after that. One night, I left my room to grab water from the kitchen, and when I opened my door, I nearly collided with Miriam. She was standing right outside my room. I physically jumped back, my hand slamming against the doorframe. Jesus Christ! She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't even look surprised. She just turned and limped down the hallway, silent as ever, as if I was the one who had intruded on her. It left me rattled. I lay awake that night staring at the door, listening for footsteps, terrified she might come back. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing her more and more, in places she shouldn't have been. The laundry room in the basement, the stairwell late at night. Once she was crouched in the garden out back, her face hidden by the branches until she slowly lifted her head and met my eyes. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that she was just eccentric, maybe mentally unwell, but not dangerous. But then I lost my room key. Every bedroom in the houses had an old lock, a relic from when the buildings were hotels decades earlier. Most people didn't bother locking their doors, but I always did. When I realized my key was missing, I tore my room apart searching for it. Nothing. I was pissed mostly because it meant I had to go to the hardware store, get a copy made from the spare, and spend money I didn't have. But deep down, I was unsettled. A few nights later, I woke in the dark to a noise. A soft, rhythmic bump. At first, half asleep, I thought it was something outside, but then I realized it was coming from my closet. Every 20 seconds or so, there was a faint shifting sound, like something brushing against the door from the inside. I froze in bed listening, my pulse hammering in my ears. After a full minute, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and forced myself up. I wasn't going to lie there all night imagining things. I crept to the closet, took a deep breath, and in one sudden motion yanked the door open. What I saw made me scream. Miriam was inside. She was crouched low, her wide eyes locked on mine. One of my neckties was looped around her throat like a necklace, and in her right hand she clutched a kitchen knife. My scream startled her. She lurched forward, the knife flashing in the dim light. I screamed again, this time in raw fear, and instinct took over. We collided, the knife skittering across the floor as I wrestled her down. She was frail, her body light, but she fought like an animal, scratching, biting, thrashing beneath me. I yelled for help, my throat raw. Doors slammed open in the hallway. My friend Eli burst in first, then Lee, one of the older students. Together we pinned Miriam to the floor, her screams turning guttural, almost inhuman. "Call the cops!" I shouted, my voice cracking. Someone did. The rest was a blur, blue and red lights flashing outside, police swarming the hallway, Miriam handcuffed and dragged away. When they searched her, they found my missing key in her pocket. The truth came out slowly in the weeks after. Miriam wasn't an alum. She wasn't faculty. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. She was the property manager's sister. He had let her live in one of the unoccupied rooms without telling anyone, trying to keep it under the radar. She had severe, untreated mental health issues, but instead of getting her the help she needed, he hid her away in the co-op. When everything came to light, the manager was arrested for negligence, among other charges. I wanted to feel relief, but mostly I felt sick. Sick that I had waved at her that night. Sick that she had chosen me. Sick that I had been asleep while she crept into my room with my own key. If Eli and Lee hadn't gotten there when they did, I don't like to think about what would have happened. I graduate this spring. People keep telling me I'll look back on college as the best years of my life. But when I think of those years, I don't think of parties or classes or football games. I think of the blank stare of the woman in my closet. I think of how easily I could have been killed in the place I was supposed to call home. And I know I'll never truly feel safe living next to strangers again. I never imagined I'd end up living in the same house I grew up in, but sometimes life loops back on itself in ways you can't predict. My mother left this place to me when she passed, and though Richard and I once talked about downsizing, it never really made sense. The house was already paid off, and by the time our 3 kids grew up and left, we were too rooted here on Alderwood Lane to think about starting somewhere new. It's a modest 2-story home, brick with pale blue shutters. Nothing fancy, but it holds years of memories. I can still picture my youngest, Anna, sitting cross-legged on the porch when she was 6, chalking little drawings on the steps. I remember my middle son, David, practicing free throws for hours in the driveway until the sun dipped behind the maples. And my oldest, Lisa, sneaking in late from high school parties, thinking I didn't hear the screen door creak open. Now they're all gone, living their own lives in different corners of the country. I couldn't be prouder, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the ache of quiet sometimes. Richard still picks up odd handyman jobs here and there, painting fences, fixing leaky sinks for friends. But I've been retired for a few years now. My days are slower, softer. I spend mornings with my knitting or reading on the porch, afternoons tending to my hydrangeas, pruning roses, or just sitting out front with a glass of iced tea watching the neighborhood ebb and flow. I also listen to an embarrassing number of true crime podcasts. Richard says I'm feeding paranoia into my brain, but I tell him it's just background chatter. You've always been a people watcher, he teases. And he's right. I've always had a nose for other people's stories, the quiet details they don't realize they're showing. For months, though, the view from my porch was stagnant. The house across the street, number 47, had been sitting empty since the Bransons, an older couple, moved down to Florida. Curtains pulled shut, yard growing patchy, realtor's sign sagging in the ground. I hated looking at it. An empty house is like a missing tooth in a smile. It unsettles you. Then, last spring, someone finally bought it. I was on the porch that morning when a moving truck rumbled down the street, followed by a sleek black Audi that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. Out stepped a young man. Tall, sharp jawline, hair slicked back neatly, dressed in a fitted blazer even though it was warm enough for shorts. He couldn't have been older than 25. Looks like Wall Street just moved to Alderwood. Richard muttered beside me, peering over the rim of his coffee mug. The young man noticed us watching and raised a hand in a friendly wave. I waved back. A few days later, he came right across the street and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Caleb Dunn," he said, flashing a practiced smile. His handshake was firm, the way my father used to tell me a man's should be. He told us he was a few years out of college, originally from Chicago, now working in marketing, freelance contracts for brands and online personalities. I nodded politely, though I didn't fully grasp it. To me, marketing was still billboards and magazine spreads. But whatever he did, it seemed to pay well. Caleb was polite and easy to talk to, not arrogant the way you might expect from someone so young and seemingly well off. He and Richard hit it off right away, swapping basketball stories like old friends. Caleb laughed easily, and his energy was refreshing in a neighborhood mostly populated by retirees and young families. For the first few months, it was nice. He kept his lawn neat, waved when he came and went, occasionally stopped by for a short chat. He seemed ambitious but grounded, maybe a little lonely. Then I started noticing her. The first time, I was pruning roses when a little white convertible rolled up and parked in front of Caleb's house. Out stepped a young woman, no older than 22, with long blonde hair that shimmered in the sunday. She wore a short dress and heels, the kind of outfit you'd expect for a nightclub, not a quiet suburban street. She let herself into Caleb's house with a key. I raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. Probably his girlfriend. But her visits became strange. Sometimes, she came when Caleb wasn't home, slipping inside like she owned the place. She never stayed the night. She was always in and out, calm and efficient. Weeks passed, and the pattern repeated. Finally, one hot afternoon in July, I was watering my hydrangeas when I heard shouting. Across the street, Caleb and the blonde stood in the driveway, voices sharp. "You don't get to just show up whenever you want," Caleb snapped, his tone more desperate than angry. The girl shot back. "You never answer me. What are you hiding?" Her hands cut through the air, her voice loud enough to make the neighbor's curtains twitch. "Ellie, this isn't working," Caleb said. "We need space. Time apart." She glared at him, lips curled in something between a sneer and a sob. Then she slammed herself into the convertible and peeled away, tires screeching against the pavement. That was the first time I heard her name Ellie. From that moment on, something shifted. Her visits became more frequent. I'd see her car parked there when Caleb wasn't home, her figure slipping through the front door like a shadow. I told Richard. "She's in his house again," I whispered from the porch one evening. Richard didn't look up from his paper. "Not our business, Margaret. Let the boy figure out his own mess." I tried to listen to him. I tried, but a pit grew in my stomach every time I saw that white convertible. Then came the night everything fell apart. It was close to 2 a.m. when I woke to the wail of sirens tearing down Alderwood Lane. Red and blue lights splashed across our bedroom walls. Richard and I stumbled outside, joining other neighbors, gathering in their robes and slippers. Caleb's house was swarming with police cars and an ambulance. My breath caught when 2 officers led Ellie out in handcuffs. Her hair was a tangled mess, her dress stained, her face expressionless. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just stared ahead as though she were already elsewhere. Moments later, paramedics wheeled Caleb out on a stretcher. His shirt was soaked through with blood. His face was pale, his eyes barely fluttering open. I gasped so loudly one of the officers looked at me. He survived. Barely. A week later, Caleb came home, frail but alive. Richard and I went to check on him. He let us in without hesitation. The living room was stripped bare, boxes stacked neatly like he was already halfway gone. He sat heavily on the couch, his voice hoarse, and told us everything. Ellie had stolen his spare house key months earlier and made a copy. She'd been tracking his phone's location, breaking in while he was gone, going through his things. Worst of all, she had planted hidden cameras in his bedroom and office. Tiny devices she replaced the batteries for every time she slipped inside. She wanted control. Caleb muttered, rubbing his bandaged arm. She said if I didn't do what she asked, dinners, jewelry, trips, she'd ruin me. I tried to break it off. That night I told her it was really over. She came back with a knife. He trailed off, eyes distant. If the police hadn't gotten there when they did, I didn't know what to say. Richard reached out, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. You'll get through this, son. You will. But I could see it in his eyes. Caleb was changed, haunted. 2 weeks later, the Audi was gone. Number 47 sat dark and empty again, curtains drawn tight. Now, I still sit on my porch every morning with my tea, but when I glance across the street, all I see is the memory of flashing lights, the echo of sirens, and I wonder how many of us live beside someone whose story we don't really know until it's too late. I never thought much about the first place I lived in after moving out of my parents' house. To me, it was just supposed to be a stepping stone, something temporary before I figured out where I really wanted to be. I grew up in a middle-class family in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. My parents weren't bad people, but they were the type who measured success with rigid milestones: college by 18, job by 22, marriage by 25. I'd always felt suffocated by that. By the time I was 20, I was desperate to carve out a space of my own, even if that meant scraping by with the bare minimum. So when I finally moved out, the apartment I chose wasn't glamorous. It was a dingy 2-story complex on the far edge of the city, tucked behind an old gas station and a shuttered laundromat. The walls were yellowed with age. The carpet had permanent stains, and every appliance sounded like it was on its last breath. But it was cheap, really cheap, and when you're that age, cheap rent feels like freedom. The complex had about 20 units, mostly filled with community college students, single parents, or people just trying to get by. Despite its flaws, it had a certain energy. Neighbors sitting out on their balconies late at night, smoking, kids running around the parking lot, music bleeding through the paper-thin walls. It was noisy, but it felt alive, except for one guy. Everyone in the building knew about him. He lived in Unit 1-4, directly across the breezeway from me. None of us knew his name. He never joined the small gatherings we'd have outside. He never even responded to casual hellos. He just lingered. The laundry room was attached to the back of the building, and more often than not, you'd see him standing there even though he never seemed to actually wash clothes. His outfit never changed: faded jeans, a gray sweatshirt, old work boots. Same thing, every single day. At first, most of us brushed him off as the token creep that every low-rent complex seemed to come with. You keep your head down, mind your business, and hope he keeps to himself. That's the deal. For a while, it worked. My next-door neighbor in Unit 1-2 was a girl around my age. Her name was Elena Carson. She was in her second year at the local community college. She had long auburn hair, sharp features, and this way of carrying herself that seemed both hurried and cautious, like she was always running late and didn't want anyone to notice her at the same time. I'd catch glimpses of her when she dashed out the door, usually late at night. She'd slam it shut behind her, barely looking around. We didn't talk much, but because of the thin walls, I knew more about her than I probably should have. She was on the phone a lot, her voice carrying through the plaster as if she were in the same room. Sometimes I'd hear laughter, sometimes arguments, sometimes sobbing. Every now and then, she'd bring someone over, usually a guy. Those nights, I didn't sleep much, but I didn't mind. She seemed normal, if a little troubled. That's why the night everything went wrong, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. It was a Sunday night in early spring. I'd been out with a few neighbors drinking cheap beer in the parking lot, and by the time I crawled into bed, I was exhausted. Sometime around 2 a.m., I was yanked out of sleep by shouting. At first, I thought it was someone outside, but then I realized it was coming from Elena's apartment. "Get out, you're disgusting," like I'd ever. Her voice was sharp, panicked. Then a man's voice, low and angry, cut through. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone made my stomach knot. It went back and forth, escalating. Something crashed against the wall. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, listening. I'd never heard her fight with anyone before. I almost called the police, but my brain immediately talked me out of it. It's probably just a boyfriend. They'll work it out. Not my business. That's what I told myself. I buried my head in the pillow, forcing myself to go back to sleep. By morning, I regretted it. There was this weight in my chest I couldn't shake. Something felt wrong. I stepped outside, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Elena's car was still parked in her assigned space, right next to mine. That meant she hadn't left. But when I knocked on her door, there was no answer. "Hello, Elena?" Silence. I knocked again. Harder this time. Still nothing. That's when I heard another door creak open behind me. Across the breezeway, Unit 14's door was cracked, just enough for a pair of eyes to stare through. The creep. "Can I help you?" he muttered. His voice was raspy, unused. His pale face peeked out from the shadows, unblinking. "I'm just trying to see if my neighbor's okay," I said, motioning toward Elena's door. "You hear anything last night?" His eyes narrowed. "Why all the knocking?" I shifted uncomfortably. "Because she's not answering and her car's still here." "You didn't hear anything?" He hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "Her name was Elena." Was. The word caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Was," I asked carefully. "I don't know," he muttered, gripping the edge of his door so tightly his knuckles turned white. Beads of sweat slid down his forehead. "Listen, man," I said, my voice rising with nerves. "I heard yelling last night. You did too, don't act like you didn't. If you saw or heard anything, you need to tell me." He stared at me, unblinking. Then he whispered, "I don't know." His breathing grew shallow, his shoulders tense. I suddenly realized just how on edge he was. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything," I said quickly, raising my hands. Why don't you come inside?" he interrupted. His tone was off, flat. "We can talk about it. It's early." "No thanks," I said immediately, stepping back. Before I could say more, he slammed the door shut, hard. The impact caught my finger in the frame. Pain exploded up my hand. "Shit," I yelped, cradling my finger, which bent at an angle it definitely shouldn't have. Adrenaline surged through me. In a fit of anger and pain, I kicked his door as hard as I could. I didn't expect anything to happen, but the lock gave way. The door flew open with a splintering crack, and what I saw inside will never leave me. The living room was a nightmare. The floor was covered in torn, blood-stained clothing. Bras, underwear, socks, all women's, all filthy, strung across the room like some kind of grotesque decoration. On the carpet, in the center, was Elena, or what was left of her. Her body had been dismembered, arranged in pieces around a circle, drawn in her blood. Her auburn hair had been hacked off, clumps of it taped to the walls. Her scalp still attached to some of the hair lay beside an overturned laundry basket. The creep stood frozen in the corner, his mouth open in a silent scream. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. Oh my God. He took a step toward me, his hands twitching. I bolted. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to fight. I sprinted down the breezeway, nearly tripping over the stairs, and ran until I reached the parking lot. My hands fumbled with my phone, dialing 911 as tears blurred my vision. By the time the police arrived, the creep had locked himself inside his unit. It took hours for them to breach the door, and when they did, he was gone. The apartment was exactly as I'd seen it. Elena's remains laid out in a sickening display, but he had vanished. They searched the woods, the roads, even the storm drains. Nothing. For weeks, news trucks swarmed the complex. Neighbors were interviewed. Everyone had a story about how unsettling he was, but nobody knew his name. The landlord claimed he'd signed the lease under a false ID. He was never found. I broke my lease the very next day. I couldn't walk past that breezeway without seeing her car still parked there, the bloodstains on the concrete that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase. To this day, I still hear Elena's voice through the wall sometimes. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I'll jolt awake to faint shouting. Just like that Sunday night, I'll never forgive myself for not calling the police sooner. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe she was already doomed. But the thought haunts me. And whenever someone asks me why I don't look for cheap rent anymore, I tell them the truth. You get what you pay for. And sometimes, what you pay for is living next door to a monster. I never imagined my late 20s would feel so empty. By that point in my life, I thought I'd be married. Maybe with a kid, a decent home of my own, and stability I could be proud of. Instead, I was back at my parents' place, sleeping in the same room I grew up in, surrounded by old posters peeling off the walls, and the faint smell of my dad's cigarettes drifting in from the garage. It wasn't that I had failed in life completely. I had a decent job working for a logistics company. I was financially stable, and I had even saved enough for a down payment on a house. But something about being back home in my old town gnawed at me. It felt like moving backwards, and every time I scrolled through social media, seeing old classmates showing off new homes, engagements, or vacations with kids in tow, it carved me open a little more. That's when I told myself I needed to move out, no matter what. The housing market wasn't easy, and I quickly learned how depressing it could be to scroll through endless listings of homes that were either too expensive, too run down, or both. I wanted something affordable, but not something that looked like it would collapse if the wind hit it too hard. After months of searching and failed showings, my real estate agent, a wiry man named Alan Pierce, told me he had something different in mind. "You're not gonna love the drive," he told me over the phone one Tuesday morning. "But the house itself? It's clean, recently maintained, and priced suspiciously low, I'll admit. About 45 minutes from here, near the outskirts. Small town, mostly farmland, but I think it's worth looking at." "Suspiciously low?" I asked. "What's the catch?" Alan chuckled, the kind of forced laugh agents give when they're trying to nudge you into ignoring your gut. "Catch? Nothing official. Just one of those quick sale situations. The sellers want out. Badly. Happens all the time." I wasn't convinced, but I agreed to see it. That Sunday afternoon, I drove with my dad out to the property. My dad was the kind of man who believed every house had bad bones, unless proven otherwise. He didn't trust cheap sales either, so I knew he'd spot anything suspicious. The drive out was strange fields stretching for miles, barns leaning like crooked teeth, and cows lazily grazing by fence posts. I'd grown up in the city, used to noise and neon lights, so the silence of the countryside felt unnatural to me. When we pulled up to the property, I was surprised. The house was modest 2 floors, white siding, a porch that had clearly been redone in the past few years. It wasn't flashy, but it was well kept. There was even a small garden out front, though weeds had started overtaking the roses. On the porch stood a couple, George and Linda Rowe, smiling politely as Alan introduced us. They were middle-aged, maybe late 50s. George had a stiff posture, his hand resting on Linda's shoulder as though he needed to keep her grounded. Inside, the place was cozy. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom, a living room with old hardwood floors, and a small but workable kitchen. My dad even nodded approvingly at the basement foundation, which said a lot. "I'll be honest," I told Alan quietly while George and Linda fussed in the kitchen. "This is better than I expected." "Told you," he said, grinning. The strangest part came as we were leaving. As we stepped out, I glanced back through the living room window and saw George and Linda standing together, hands clasped, staring at the ceiling and whispering something under their breath. A prayer, maybe. Odd, but I brushed it off. A month later, the house was mine. My cousin Derek and my dad helped me move in. We carried boxes late into the evening, sweating, cursing, and eventually laughing once the heavy stuff was done. That was when I met him, my neighbor. He appeared on his porch as we were unloading a mattress, waving with a tired smile. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with salt and pepper stubble and a flannel shirt that hung loose around his frame. "Evenin'," he called out. "New neighbor?" "That's me," I said, setting the mattress down. He walked over, extending his hand. "Name's Martin Hale. Been here, well, longer than I care to admit." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Jack," I said. "Nice to meet you, Martin." "You need a hand? I don't mind." Before I could answer, he was already helping Derek with a box. Within half an hour, he was sitting in my living room with us, drinking a beer, laughing about the joys of moving. That's when he noticed the painting. On the wall above the couch hung a framed reproduction of the Mona Lisa, left behind by the previous owners. I had no attachment to it, but it seemed to belong there, so I left it hanging. Martin stared at it for a long time. Too long. "You like art?" I asked. His lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "She's beautiful. Always has been." "Did you know I painted that one?" I blinked. "Wait, you painted this?" He nodded. "Gave it to George and Linda years ago as a housewarming gift. Guess it stayed here." "Well, it's impressive," I said carefully. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I used to live in this house. Long before they did. That unsettled me." "Really? Why'd you move next door then?" Martin's expression shifted, hardening. "My daughter, she ran away. Years back. I thought maybe if I stayed close she'd find her way back home." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. He chuckled suddenly, the sound sharp. "Also, this house might be haunted." I froze. "Haunted?" "I'm kidding." He clapped my shoulder and stood. "Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood. I'll let you settle in." But his words stuck to me like glue. The first week was fine. The house was quiet, clean, and surprisingly comfortable. But every creak at night made me tense. Every whistle of wind through the old windows had me sitting up in bed. At work, I grew tired, distracted. Derek noticed I seemed off when he came by one evening. My dad brushed it off as me being soft about living alone. But Martin never came back around. His house stayed dark most nights, no car in the driveway. I started wondering if he'd lied about living next door at all. Then came that night. I couldn't sleep. The floor creaked, but this time it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like footsteps. Then came the whispering, low, guttural, male. I slipped out of bed, heart hammering, and crept to the stairs. Halfway down, I saw him. Martin. He stood in the living room, facing the Mona Lisa painting, muttering words I could barely make out. "Better place now, baby girl. Daddy loves you. Forgive me." Did what I had to do. My blood ran cold. He was talking to someone who wasn't there. He finished, kissed his hand, pressed it to the painting, and calmly walked out the back door. I heard the lock click. I couldn't breathe. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone that someone had broken in. As I waited for sirens, something inside me snapped. I grabbed a flashlight and the small axe I kept in the hall closet. I couldn't take my eyes off the painting. Before I knew it, I ripped it off the wall. Behind it, the wall looked wrong, patched, uneven. Rage and terror mixed in me as I swung the axe. Chunks of plaster flew. The smell hit first rot, unmistakable. Then came the truth. Behind the wall was the decayed body of a girl. The police arrived minutes later. I stumbled onto the lawn, waving them down, incoherent. When I told them what I'd found, their faces hardened. They stormed Martin's house. Gunshot. By the time they entered, he had already taken his life. The investigation revealed everything. Martin's daughter, Emily Hale, hadn't run away. She'd been abused for years before he killed her in that very house. He patched her into the wall and gifted that painting as a cover. The Rose, the couple before me, claimed they never knew. They had heard noises, felt uneasy, but ignored it. Selling cheap was their escape. I was left with nightmares. The memory of Martin whispering to his daughter, to the corpse he left behind, haunts me still. I moved out months later. The house was sealed, then sold again after renovations. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if whoever lives there now hears the same whispers I did, because I swear sometimes, even far away, I still hear them. Daddy loves you. I never thought moving would change my life the way it did. In the summer of 2011, I was 34 years old, married to my wife, Hannah, and the father of a 9-year-old girl named Lily. We'd been renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment outside of Trenton, New Jersey for almost 7 years. It wasn't terrible, but the walls were thin, the parking was a nightmare, and the rent kept creeping up every year. By that point, both Hannah and I worked from home. She did freelance graphic design, and I handled IT support contracts for a handful of companies. Having 2 adults working out of the same small apartment, with a kid who was outgrowing her space, was starting to wear us down. Lily had to do her homework at the kitchen table most nights because her bedroom doubled as Hannah's office. We'd been saving for a house but weren't quite there yet. So when we found a decent rental in a townhouse development in Maplewood, Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes away, we jumped at the chance. It wasn't glamorous rows of nearly identical brick front homes, narrow backyards, cookie-cutter driveways, but it was affordable, the schools were good, and most importantly, it was bigger. Lily would finally have her own room without anyone's desk in it. I remember the day we moved in because it was brutally hot, the kind of August heat that makes the air feel thick. We were unloading the truck when the man from the unit next door walked over. He looked to be in his early 70s, tall but slightly hunched, with neatly combed gray hair and a tucked-in polo shirt. His smile was broad, almost too broad, and his voice carried like he was used to speaking over noise. "New neighbors, huh?" he said, holding a plate of brownies wrapped in foil. "Name's Richard, but everyone calls me Rick. Been here nearly 40 years. Welcome to the block." I set down the box I was carrying and shook his hand. His grip was firm, dry. "Thanks, Rick. I'm Aaron. This is my wife, Hannah, and that's our daughter, Lily." He bent slightly and gave Lily a wave. 9, 10 years old? Just turned 9, I said. "Sharp eye," Hannah added politely, though I noticed her shifting slightly closer to Lily. Rick chuckled. "I've seen a lot of kids grow up on this street. Yours'll like it here. Nice and quiet. Safer than most places, too." We thanked him for the brownies, and I expected him to head back, but he lingered. He asked where we'd moved from, what kind of work we did, how long we planned to stay. His questions weren't unusual, but there was something about the way he asked them so direct, with his eyes holding just a second too long, that made me uncomfortable. Before leaving, he glanced at our townhouse, then back at us. "Funny thing," he said, "that unit's had a lot of different families over the years. Never the same people, for too long." I laughed awkwardly. "Well, we're planning to stay a while." "Hope you do," he said, smiling. "Be a shame otherwise." And with that, he walked back to his place. At first, we brushed it off. Rick seemed like the stereotypical older neighbor, lonely, maybe a little too eager to chat, but harmless. But after a few days, I noticed he was always around. If I left in the morning for groceries, he was outside watering his lawn. If I came home late, he was on his porch. Sometimes he waved. Sometimes he just watched. Lily noticed too. One evening she pulled her bedroom blinds shut and said, "I don't like the way Rick looks at me." I tried to reassure her. "He's just old, honey. Probably doesn't even realize he's staring. Don't worry about it." But I'd seen it too. Whenever she was outside, even just for a few minutes, he seemed to appear. A couple weeks after moving in, I was dragging our recycling bin back when Rick walked over. "Hot one today," he said. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep it short. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know, the families before you never used the back bedroom either." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He just smiled like he'd told a private joke. "Just something I noticed." Then he walked off. That night I told Hannah about it. We decided to check the back bedroom, technically the guest room, though we hadn't furnished it yet. There was just a mattress on the floor and a couple of unopened boxes. At first, nothing seemed strange, but then I noticed a small hole near the baseboard on the far wall. It was about the size of a pencil, drilled clean through the drywall. Not a nail hole too clean for that. I crouched down and tried to peer through, but it was blocked, or maybe just too dark on the other side. Hannah knelt beside me, her face tightening. "You think he made that?" I didn't answer. The hole lined up almost perfectly with the wall between our unit and Rick's other B. That evening, I patched it with putty. We didn't confront him. I didn't want to accuse a 70-year-old man without proof, but the way he'd mentioned that room unsettled me. Life went on, but I found myself checking the patched wall every couple nights, almost expecting to find something new. I bought blackout curtains for Lily's room and put a shelf in front of that wall in the guest room. We didn't tell Lily, no sense scaring her. Instead, I installed a pair of cameras, one at the front door, one covering the backyard. They never caught anything unusual, but I still checked them almost daily. By October, things had quieted down. Rick still appeared outside constantly, but he hadn't said anything strange. We started to relax, until one evening, he rang our doorbell. Through the peephole I saw him holding a plastic container. "Evening," he said when I cracked the door. "Made some cookies. Thought I'd drop them off. You folks have been good neighbors, quiet. Barely even noticed anyone was there." His words sent a chill down my back. I thanked him quickly and closed the door. We didn't eat the cookies. Later that night, I checked the guest room again. The patch was still holding, but a few feet to the right, I noticed a new mark. Another small hole. My heart pounded as I crouched down. This time, I could see through clearly into Rick's unit. It looked like an empty room with the light on. As I stared, a shadow moved, then a footstep appeared directly in front of the hole. I shot back, heart racing, and shut the guest room door. The next morning, I told Hannah we needed to move. She didn't argue. Within a week, I called the landlord, explained we wanted to break the lease. We had to pay a penalty, but it didn't matter. By December, we were gone. We've been in a detached house ever since. Bigger yard, no shared walls, no neighbors within arm's length. Sometimes I wonder how many families before us saw those holes. How many of them noticed Rick watching? How many of them left for the same reason? And I wonder if the family who moved in after us ever checked their guest room. Because I'm certain of one thing. Rick never stopped watching. I moved to Cedarville in the fall of 2012, when I was 21. Back then, I was a junior at Riverbend University, trying to balance school, a part-time job at the campus bookstore, and the feeling of finally being on my own. My parents lived 2 hours away, so I visited them sometimes, but for the most part, I was figuring out adulthood by myself. I didn't have a lot of money, and the dorms were too expensive, so I found this small one-bedroom apartment just a 10-minute walk from campus. It wasn't nice. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled faintly like mildew no matter how much I vacuumed, and the kitchen appliances looked like they hadn't been replaced since the early 90s. But the rent was low, and that was all I cared about. At first, I liked the independence. I'd walk home late from study sessions at the library, make ramen at midnight, and feel like I was finally living life on my own terms. But I didn't spend much time in the apartment during the day. It was too quiet, too cramped. At night, though, I was always there, usually in bed before midnight. That's when I started noticing the noises. The apartment above mine was occupied, but I never saw who lived there. The first few weeks, I just heard occasional thumps like someone had dropped something heavy or dragged furniture. I figured it was a student moving things around. No big deal. But then it became a pattern. Almost every night, around midnight or later, I'd hear heavy footsteps. Sometimes it sounded like someone was being dragged slowly across the floor. Then silence. Then another thump. It didn't sound like normal living noises. No television, no music, no laughter, just dragging and thudding. One night, after being woken up for the third time that week, I muttered to myself, "What the hell are they doing up there?" I tried to ignore it, but the noises got worse. By the end of the month, I started hearing crying. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to keep me awake. A faint, muffled sound of someone sobbing. Other nights, I heard voices low, conversational, almost like whispers through the ceiling. They weren't shouting, just talking. But it didn't sound like television dialogue. It sounded like a man speaking to someone right above me, except it never made sense. One night, around 2 a.m., I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling. The crying was faint but there, like someone trying to keep quiet while breaking down. I whispered to myself, "That's not the television, that's a person." I tried to convince myself maybe I was mishearing. Old buildings carried sounds weirdly. Maybe it was from the courtyard or the next building over, but every time, it felt like it was directly above me. Finally, one night after 2 straight hours of dragging noises, I couldn't take it anymore. I went upstairs. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint. I stood in front of the upstairs unit, my knuckles hovering before I finally knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open. A man in his late 50s stood there. He wore a button-up shirt tucked neatly into slacks, like he'd just come from church or an office job. His silver hair was combed, and his face looked surprised to see me, though not angry. Hi," I said awkwardly. "Sorry to bother you. I live downstairs and I've been hearing a lot of noise late at night. Furniture dragging, heavy footsteps, that kind of thing. Just wondering if you could maybe keep it down?" The man blinked, then smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it carried through. I have trouble sleeping sometimes. I walk around a lot at night to stretch out." "Right," I said. "I figured maybe you had people over or something. I thought I heard, voices." He shook his head. "Number, I live alone. Always have. Just me up here." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Still, he wasn't rude. He apologized again, and I nodded, pretending it was fine. But as I walked back downstairs, my mind kept circling around his words. If he lived alone, who was crying? Who was he talking to? The next few nights got worse. The crying happened more often, faint, shaky sobs that stopped suddenly, like someone had covered a mouth mid-breath. Once, I heard a soft voice say, "Please, don't." I froze in my bed. That wasn't furniture. That wasn't someone talking to themselves. The next day, I went to the management office. The woman at the desk looked up the unit. "It's rented to a Mr. Harold Benton," she said. "Lives alone. He's been here a few years. Never had complaints." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Like no roommates or anyone else with a key?" She frowned. "We don't allow subletting. And as far as our records show, it's just him." I walked out unsettled. That night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, ear pressed to the ceiling. The voices were faint, but real. I thought I heard the word, "Help." My heart pounded. Finally, I couldn't stand it. Around 1:30 a.m., I crept back upstairs. I pressed my ear against his door. For a moment, silence. Then his voice, low, calm, like he was soothing someone. I leaned closer. Suddenly the door swung open. I stumbled forward, hitting the floor hard. My palms burned as I scrambled up, heart racing. Mr. Benton stood above me, staring. His expression wasn't angry, it was blank. "Sorry," I stammered. "I thought I heard something. I didn't mean to." I looked past him into the apartment. It was spotless. Minimal furniture, A small table, a single chair, no television, no signs of anyone else, just him and me. He stepped aside slightly, as if inviting me to see for myself. My skin prickled. "No, I'm sorry. My mistake," I muttered, backing away. Then I turned and hurried back down the stairs without looking back. That night, I didn't sleep at all, because I knew what I'd heard. Someone had been talking in there. Someone else had cried. But when the door opened, it was gone. Over the next week, I avoided being home at night. I stayed late at the library, sometimes until sunrise, then crashed for a few hours during the day. Still, whenever I was in my apartment at night, the noises came back. Sometimes rhythmic tapping against the ceiling, like he knew I was listening. By the end of the semester, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke my lease early, losing my deposit, and moved in with a friend across town. 2 weeks later, I ran into a guy from my old building on campus. "Hey, you heard about Benton?" he asked. "What about him?" I asked cautiously. "They found him last week. Paramedics had to carry him out. Some kind of breakdown, I guess. Place was weird. They won't say much. Just that, he's gone." "Gone?" I repeated. "Yeah, hospital or something, don't think he's coming back." That was the last I ever heard of Harold Benton. But sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet, I swear I still hear faint dragging noises in my head, like he's just above me again, pacing in circles, talking to someone I can't see, and I'll never know who was really up there with him. I moved into a quiet neighborhood in the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, in early spring of last year. At the time, I had just come off a rough winter. My long-term relationship had ended badly. My lease on a downtown apartment was running out, and I wanted a reset, somewhere quieter, cheaper, and less tangled up with the memories of my ex. The house I found wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. A one-story ranch with faded green shutters, a patchy lawn, and a small fenced-in backyard. The price was reasonable, and the area was calm, mostly retirees, older couples, and a few families. No loud parties, no traffic jams, no constant sirens like in the city. It felt like a place I could breathe. The house next to mine belonged to a man named Eric Dalton. He was around my age, maybe 31 or 32, with dark hair he kept too short on the sides, and a beard that always looked half-shaved. His place was a little bigger than mine, with a sprawling backyard that stretched to the tree line. In the far corner stood a tall, rust-colored metal shed. From my bedroom window, I had a direct view of it. It was locked with a heavy chain, the kind you'd use on a construction site. At first, I figured it was just for tools or maybe a motorcycle. Eric and I didn't talk much at first. We exchanged waves when taking the trash out or mowing the lawn. He worked from home, same as me. Though I didn't ask what he did, he had that kind of private, clipped way of speaking that made you not want to press for details. About a month after I moved in, he came over with a six-pack. "Figured it was time I introduced myself," he said, handing me a cold can of Miller Lite. We sat on my back deck and talked for a while. He was easy enough to get along with. We both liked hiking, though I actually went and he just talked about it. We had similar taste in movies. He loved old crime thrillers, the gritty kind with long silences. He had opinions about everything, and if you disagreed, he'd get sharp about it, like he was arguing a case. Still, he laughed easily, and I thought maybe I'd lucked into a decent neighbor. Over the next few months, we hung out more. Sometimes we watched fights on television. Sometimes just had beers on the weekend. He was intense, sure, but not in a way that seemed dangerous, at least not then. The shift happened one night when I joked about how loud his video game shouting was. "Man, you get pretty into those," I said with a laugh. His expression froze. "You saying I'm too loud?" His voice sharpened. "It was just a joke," I said, holding up my hands. He stood up suddenly, knocking over a beer bottle. "Don't tell me how to live in my own house," he snapped before storming out. I texted him the next day, but he never replied. That was the end of our easy friendship. Weeks passed with no contact. Then, one night around 2 a.m., I woke to muffled screaming. At first I thought it was a dream, but when I sat up I realized the sound was real low, panicked, and distant. I walked to the window. The neighborhood was dark and silent, but the sound seemed to be coming from Eric's yard. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The screaming cut off after a few minutes. I walked up to the fence, shining my light into the dark yard. "Eric?" I called. Nothing. His house was dark, the shed standing like a shadow in the corner. I didn't feel comfortable hopping the fence, so I called the non-emergency police line. A cruiser showed up half an hour later. The officer knocked on Eric's door, walked the yard with a flashlight, and then shrugged. "Could have been an animal," he said, "or someone had their television up too loud." I wanted to argue, but I didn't have proof. So I nodded and went back inside, unsettled. Things got stranger after that. I saw Eric more often, usually in the evenings. He'd stand near the shed smoking a cigarette, or disappear into the garage for hours. We didn't talk. Then, one night, my dog Cooper, a 30-pound black mutt with floppy ears, got out. I'd forgotten to latch the gate. I searched the neighborhood calling his name, printed flyers, even taped them to telephone poles. Cooper always stayed close to home, so it didn't make sense that he would vanish. The next morning, Eric waved at me from his porch, a big smile on his face. I forced myself to wave back, though something about it made my stomach knot. Later that day, he walked over. "Hey," he said casually, as if nothing had ever happened. "Sorry for blowing up that night. I had a rough week. No hard feelings?" "Yeah," I said cautiously. "You should come by later," he offered. "Have a drink. Catch up." I told him I'd think about it, but the sudden friendliness after months of silence felt off. I called him that evening to decline. He didn't sound disappointed, just said, "Your call." That night, when I got home around 11, I looked out my window and saw him walking to the shed. He unlocked it with a flashlight in hand and went inside. He stayed there for 20 minutes. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I heard clanking metal on metal. My skin crawled. A few days later, something appeared on my porch. It was Cooper's metal food bowl. Inside was a single dog treat, the same brand I used to give him. I froze. My chest felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out. I took a picture and called the cops. This time, I explained everything in detail. Cooper's disappearance, the shed, the screaming, the bowl. The officer sighed. "I get it, but unless you have solid proof, there's not much we can do. You could file in small claims if you want to accuse him of theft, but we can't get a warrant on a hunch." I wanted to scream, but I knew they were right. A week later, Eric came into my backyard without knocking. I was watering plants when I felt him behind me. "Got something to show you," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. I turned, the hose shaking in my grip. "I'm busy." He tilted his head. "It'll only take a second." In the shed, my throat tightened. Not interested. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Your loss," he said, turning back toward his yard. I stood there, every instinct screaming to lock my doors. That was 6 months ago. I still live in the house. I still see him almost every day. He mows his lawn, smokes on the porch, waters his own plants. On the surface, he's just another neighbor, but I can't stop wondering what's in that shed. I dream about it sometimes, hearing Cooper scratching from inside, hearing muffled voices begging for help, and sometimes, when the wind dies down at night, I swear I can hear faint clanking coming from Eric's yard. Not loud enough to call the cops again. Not loud enough to prove anything. Just loud enough to keep me awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing my dog never just ran away. And that the shed is more than just a shed.